Hello. Write in the comments where you are from. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like. Enjoy listening. We picked you up from the orphanage so you would serve us, not so you could open your mouth. Vinette's mother-in-law screamed. After that, her husband grabbed a pair of scissors and, in front of their friends, cut off her long hair. When they finished laughing, Vinette silently took her phone from the table and stopped the recording. She looked straight at them and said, "Thanks for the show, this video will be very useful to me in court. Especially the face of your congressman friend in the background." The smiles instantly vanished from their faces. What began 3 minutes later, but before those 3 minutes there had been an entire evening. An evening that was supposed to be just another in a series of identical, humiliating evenings in the Telford house. Martin's 40th birthday, her husband. The house buzzed like a disturbed hive. Important people, influential friends, their well-groomed wives in expensive dresses. The air was thick with the smell of money, costly perfume, and vanity. Vinette moved through this buzzing like a shadow. Her task was simple, to watch. To make sure glasses were never empty, ashtrays were clean, and snacks appeared on the tables before anyone had the chance to think of them. She was not a guest. She was part of the decor, useful and invisible. 15 years in this house had taught her the most important thing, to be invisible. The less they noticed her, the calmer the day passed. She wore a plain black dress, strict, without a single ornament. The only bright thing about her was her hair. Long, thick, chestnut. All the way down to her waist. The only thing that was truly hers. Sometimes late at night, brushing it before bed, she felt it was the only thread tying her to some other, real life she had never had. The evening rolled on along the same tracks. Martin, her husband, shone in the center of attention. He was handsome with that lazy, well-kept beauty of a man who had never had to fight for his place under the sun. He laughed, accepted gifts, patted friends on the shoulder. From time to time his gaze landed on Vinette, but it was the look of a master at his servant, fleeting, assessing whether everything was in order. The matriarch of the evening, Louise, her mother-in-law, sat in an armchair like a queen on a throne. Every word she spoke was law, every gesture, a command. She held this noisy company in her tenacious, manicured hands. And she never took her eyes off Vinette. Every step, every movement of Vinette was under her cold, relentless control. Vinette felt that gaze on her back, on her nape. It drilled into her, searching for a mistake, waiting for a slip. And the slip came. Hot appetizers. Vinette carried a large silver tray with miniature juliennes. She moved carefully, weaving between the guests. At some point one of Martin's friends, tipsy and loud, suddenly stepped back while telling a joke. Vinette managed to dodge, but the tray tilted, and a single tiny drop of sauce fell on the pristine cuff of his shirt. The man didn't even notice. He kept laughing, waving his hands. But Louise noticed. Her eyes narrowed. The merriment on her face instantly turned into icy fury. She waited until Vinette set the tray down on the table, and when she passed by her armchair, Louise spoke quietly, but loud enough for everyone at the table to hear, "Come here." The room grew quieter. Laughter broke off mid-word. All eyes turned to them. Vinette approached, her head bowed. Her heart pounded in her throat. She knew what was coming. "Do you see what you've done?" Louise's voice cut like glass. "Forgive me, Louise. It was an accident. I'll take care of it right away." "Silence," she cut her off. "You have always been clumsy. Awkward. For so many years I've tried to make something decent out of you, I invested effort, money. But the filth you came from can never be scrubbed out. It always shows through." The guests' faces turned into masks. Some looked on with open curiosity. Some with a sneering grin. Martin turned away, pretending to adjust the watch on his wrist. He wasn't going to interfere. He never did. I've tolerated you in my house for 15 years, Louise went on, raising her voice. I feed you, clothe you. I gave you a family name, gave you a son as a husband. And you can't even do the simplest job properly. What do you think we took you for? Why do you think we brought you out of that stinking orphanage? Vinette was silent. She stared at the floor. At the patterns of the expensive Persian rug. She had seen those patterns every day. She had cleaned that rug hundreds of times. Now she wished she could sink through it, vanish. And then Louise jumped up. Her face twisted with rage. She jabbed her finger right in Vinette's face. We picked you up from the orphanage so you would serve us, not so you could open your mouth. The phrase sounded like a gunshot. The dead silence exploded with laughter. First one of Martin's friends snickered. Then another. In a second the whole room was roaring. They laughed loudly, shamelessly, savoring the humiliation. Martin, spurred by his friend's laughter and his mother's commanding gaze, smirked too. He had to show that he was in control, that he was just like them, strong and ruthless. Mother's right, he said loudly, for everyone to hear. You give yourself too much freedom. And this mane of yours. He tugged a strand of her hair with disdain. Always getting in the way. It needs to be shortened. Louise nodded, her eyes burning with malicious triumph. Then shorten it, son. Show her her place. It was like a bad dream. Martin looked around, his gaze fell on the writing desk in the corner of the room. Among the gift wrappings and ribbons lay a large pair of office scissors. He walked over, picked them up. The blades glinted predatorily in the chandelier's light. The guests froze in anticipation of a show. Laughter faded, replaced by excited whispers. Vinette looked at her husband, at those scissors in his hand, and could not believe it. This cannot be. He won't do it. He did. He came up behind her, roughly grabbed her hair at the base, gathering it into one thick bundle. Vinette jerked, but his grip was iron. She felt the cold metal at the nape of her neck. Snip. The first strand, thick and heavy, fell to the floor. Then another. And another. He cut crudely, unevenly, hacking through the hair she had been growing her whole life. He ripped it with the scissors. The room burst into laughter again, now more like wild hysterics. Someone even pulled out a phone and started filming. Vinette caught it in her peripheral vision. She saw the face of Congressman Abington, Martin's best friend, in the background. A wide, satisfied grin spread across his face. She did not cry. She did not scream. She simply stood still until he was finished. When the last strand fell at her feet, he shoved her aside. She staggered but kept her balance. The shreds of her hair lay scattered across the expensive carpet like a dead animal. Her head suddenly felt unnaturally light. And cold. The laughter gradually died down. The show was over. The guests, having laughed themselves out, reached for their glasses again, whispering excitedly. Louise looked at Vinette with a triumphant smile. Martin tossed the scissors onto the table and smirked smugly, accepting congratulatory pats on the shoulder. In the silence that followed, Vinette took a step. Then another. She walked over to a small side table by the wall, where earlier that evening she had placed her phone, propped up against a vase of flowers. She had set it there supposedly to play background music, but in truth, deep down, she had felt something would happen tonight. She always felt it. Calmly, without a single wasted movement, she picked up the phone. The screen was glowing. It was still recording. The red dot in the corner had been blinking for 27 minutes. She pressed the stop button. Then she lifted her eyes. She did not look at Martin. She looked straight at Louise. And her voice, calm and steady, rang out with absolute clarity in the deafening silence, "Thank you for the show. This video will be very helpful to me in court." She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the frozen faces of the guests, and her eyes stopped on the man standing behind Martin, especially the face of your congressman friend in the background. At that moment the air in the room seemed to freeze. Smiles vanished from faces as if on command. Martin's smirk slipped away, replaced by bewilderment, then panic. Louise's eyes widened in disbelief. And then in them flared pure, animal rage. Congressman Abington, who a moment ago had been smirking smugly, turned pale as a sheet. "What did you say?" Louise hissed. "Give me the phone." Martin roared and lunged at her. But Vinette stepped back, gripping the device tightly in her hand. Louise also rushed forward, trying to snatch the phone away. A disgraceful, humiliating struggle began. Guests recoiled, spilling glasses. The party dissolved into chaos. At that moment Vinette noticed movement to the side. Congressman Abington was not part of the scuffle. He quickly, almost unnoticed, slipped toward the window, turning his back to everyone. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. He spoke softly, almost in a whisper, covering his mouth with his hand. The call was very short. 5, maybe 10 seconds. When he finished, he put his phone away and turned back to the others with a new, cold, calculating expression on his face. The fight over the phone was still going on. Martin was stronger, he was already nearly twisting Vinette's arm. She knew she would not hold out much longer. And then the doorbell rang, loud and insistent. Everyone froze. It rang again, demanding, authoritative. One of the guests standing closer to the door opened it nervously. 2 police officers stood on the threshold. For a moment silence hung over the room. Louise released Vinette's hand, relief flashing across her face, quickly replaced by triumph. She had clearly decided Abington had called the police to silence Vinette. But the officers did not look at Louise. They did not look at Martin. Their eyes were fixed directly on Vinette. One of them, the senior officer, stepped forward, "Vinette Graves." Vinette silently nodded. Her heart plummeted. "You are under arrest," he said in a flat, indifferent voice. "Come with us." "Under arrest?" Vinette breathed. "On what grounds?" "On charges of attempted blackmail and extortion. From Citizen Maxwell Abington." He nodded toward the congressman. Abington stood with his arms crossed, watching Vinette with icy calm. The trap had sprung shut. It hadn't happened 3 minutes later. It had happened in exactly a minute and a half. The police had not come to save her. They had come for her. The world outside the Telford living room was deafeningly quiet. The police car smelled of stale tobacco smoke and cheap air freshener. Vinette sat in the back seat, pressed against the stiff, cold faux leather. One officer got behind the wheel, the other sat next to her. He did not look at her, just stared out the window as if he were transporting not a person but some inanimate object. She was still clutching the phone in her hand. It was warm, almost alive. The only thing she had left, her only proof, her only shield. In the light of passing street lamps she saw the marks of Louise's nails on her fingers, deep red crescents. "Put the phone away," the officer beside her said indifferently, without turning his head. Reluctantly, Vinette unclenched her fingers and slipped the device into the pocket of her plain black dress. She felt naked. Not only because of her shorn, uneven hair, bristling against her neck like an icy hedgehog with every turn of her head. She was naked before the entire system, the one the Telfords and their friends, like Congressman Abington, pulled by the strings like puppeteers. No one asked her a single question. All the way to the station they rode in complete silence. That silence was more terrifying than shouts. It was confirmation that everything had already been decided. Her fate had been sealed back there, in the living room, the moment Abington made that brief phone call. The police station greeted her with the dim glow of fluorescent lamps that buzzed like an old refrigerator. The walls were painted a dreary color, the floor covered with worn tiles. The air was stale, heavy. They led her down a long corridor past shabby doors and into a small office. A table, 2 chairs, and a weary investigator with lifeless eyes. He looked as if he had seen everything in the world and could no longer be surprised by anything. He didn't offer her a seat. He simply stood there, leafing through some papers. Vinette Graves. He pronounced her name as if tasting something unpleasant. So, you're in the blackmail business. Tarnishing the reputation of respectable people. He said it without emotion, almost lazily. It was worse than if he had shouted. His indifference made it clear, he was just doing his job. An order from above. I didn't blackmail anyone, Vinette's voice was hoarse. She swallowed. I was humiliated. Attacked. My husband, he cut my hair. I have a video. The investigator smirked without lifting his eyes from the papers. A video? Interesting. And did you file a complaint about the assault? No. But a respected man filed one against you. A congressman. Stating that you threatened him with the release of some compromising video in order to extort money. That's a lie. The words burst out of Vinette. It's his word against yours. The investigator finally looked up at her. His gaze was heavy, empty. Now hand over your phone. It's material evidence in a blackmail case. Vinette's heart skipped a beat. I won't give it. It's mine. Don't make this harder, he sighed. We'll take it anyway. Search protocol, everything as required. He motioned to the officer standing by the door. Arguing was useless. She saw it in their eyes. With limp despair she pulled the phone from her pocket. Her only weapon. The investigator took it between 2 fingers, disdainfully, as if it were something foul, and dropped it into a clear plastic evidence bag. He sealed it and attached a tag, there. Evidence. Vinette stared at her phone in that plastic shroud and realized this was the end. The video was lost. They would destroy it, erase it, and no one would ever see it. They had won. The next few hours felt like a viscous, murky dream. They questioned her. Or rather, they didn't question her, they pressed her methodically. The investigator repeated the same questions, twisting her answers. He spoke of articles, of prison terms, of how easy it was to break the life of someone with no connections and no money. He didn't threaten directly. He simply painted a picture of her future. Trial, disgrace, maybe even prison. Think about yourself, Vinette, he said with false sympathy. Admit you got carried away. That you just wanted money. We'll write it up as petty misconduct. You'll get probation and go home. But if you persist, we'll put you away for real. She signed nothing. She only sat in silence, staring at a single spot on the wall. She understood this was all a performance. They didn't need to jail her. They needed to break her. To frighten her. And to take her phone. Their main goal was already achieved. Toward morning, as the city outside began to lighten, the office door opened. The investigator, who by then was openly dozing at the desk, started. Another officer entered. He whispered something into his ear. The investigator nodded and turned to Vinette. You can go. You're free. What? No charges. No protocols to sign. Nothing. You can just leave. It was that very warning shot he had spoken of. A clear signal, we can do whatever we want with you, and nothing will happen to us for it. She walked out of the police station into the pre-dawn street. The cold wind cut to the bone. Instinctively, she ran her hand over her head. Short, coarse, jagged strands. She had no money, no phone, no bag. Everything remained in that house. In her past life. The way home was long. She walked across the city on foot. Past waking houses and the first sparse cars. She moved on autopilot, guided only by habit. Here was her street. Here was their house. Big, imposing, with a tall fence. A house that had never truly been her home. She approached the gate and pulled her key from the pocket of her dress. She slid it into the lock. It wouldn't turn. She tried again. Harder. Useless. It went into the keyhole but wouldn't budge a millimeter. She touched the lock itself. It was new. Cold and alien. They had changed the locks. In the few hours she had been gone, they had erased her from their lives. Changed the locks as if she had never existed. Panic began to rise in her throat. Money. She had bank cards. In the small wallet that lay in her bag. In the house. But one card, a spare, she always kept in that same dress pocket, alongside the key. It had a little money on it, but enough for the time being. For a motel, for food. The nearest ATM was 2 blocks away. She almost ran. Her legs throbbed with exhaustion, but fear pushed her forward. She inserted the card into the slot, her fingers trembling as she typed in the PIN. A second of waiting. The screen lit up with a merciless red message, "Your card is blocked." She tried again. The same result. She pressed the "Check Balance" button. Operation impossible. Card blocked. That was it. Complete, absolute ruin. She hadn't just been thrown out. She had been erased. Cut off from every resource. No home. No money, no phone, with a shameful haircut and the reputation of a blackmailer, a story Louise had no doubt already spread by calling every mutual acquaintance. They had destroyed all the evidence and left her with nothing, out on the street. They were certain they had won. Vinette wandered aimlessly. Her feet carried her to a small park across from their house. She sat on a cold bench, damp with morning dew. The sun was rising, beginning a new day, but for her the world had sunk into darkness. She sat staring at the house that was no longer hers, feeling only emptiness. Total, all-consuming defeat. She didn't know how long she had been sitting like that. Maybe an hour, maybe 2. She heard soft, shuffling steps. Someone was approaching. She didn't lift her head. She didn't care. The steps stopped right in front of her bench. "Rough night, girl." Vinette raised her eyes. In front of her stood Dorothy Fitzgerald. Their neighbor. An old woman of about 70, sharp-tongued and, as Louise used to say, far too nosy for her age. Her property bordered theirs, and the window of her kitchen looked directly onto their veranda and living room. "I saw it all," Dorothy said quietly, sitting down beside her. She didn't look at Vinette with pity. Her gaze was stern, but there was something else in it. Compassion. "I saw it from my window. Your party, your husband with your hair, and the police coming." Vinette stayed silent. She had no strength to speak. Dorothy rummaged in her old, worn handbag. She pulled something out and held it out to Vinette. It was an old, slightly rusty key dot. "My outbuilding has been empty ever since my son moved to another state. There's a room free there. You can stay with me for now. You can't sit out here on the street." Vinette looked at the key, then at Dorothy. She couldn't believe it. "Why?" Dorothy gave a crooked smile. "I can't stand your Louise. Arrogant witch. But your father-in-law, Rupert, God rest him, I respected. He was a good man." She reached into her bag again. This time she pulled out something wrapped in an old rag. She unwrapped it. In her palm lay a small metal box. Old, blackened with time, with a heavy padlock and no key. The box was surprisingly heavy. "Here," Dorothy said, holding the box out to Vinette. "This is yours too." "What is it?" Vinette whispered. Dorothy looked her straight in the eyes. Her gaze was serious, weighty. "Your father-in-law gave this to me many years ago. Right before his death. He said," Dorothy, keep it safe. And give it to Vinette if my wife ever shows her true, cruel nature. Vinette took the heavy, cold box in her hands. She didn't know what was inside. But at that moment, sitting on the cold bench, humiliated and broken, she felt for the first time that endless night something close to hope. Dorothy's outbuilding was the complete opposite of the Telford house. A tiny room, an old but freshly scrubbed wooden floor covered with a colorful homespun rug. An iron bed with a sagging frame and a mountain of pillows. A table by the window with a geranium in a clay pot. It smelled of dried herbs and something else, faint but homely, forgotten. Comfort. Safety. Vinette walked in, holding in one hand the key to this room and in the other the heavy metal box. She set it on the table. It landed with a dull thud on the wooden surface. It was the only object from her past life that was now with her. An object that did not belong to the Telfords. Dorothy brought her a mug of hot thyme tea and a plate with sliced bread and cheese. Eat, she said, not in a commanding tone, but with care. You're going to need your strength. Obediently, Vinette sipped the tea. Warmth spread through her, driving away the cold inside. She didn't touch the food. All her thoughts were fixed on the black metal box. She picked it up, shook it. Something shifted dully inside. Not jingling, like coins. Just one heavy shift from place to place. The lock was massive, rusty. No key. There was never a key for it, Dorothy said, as if reading her thoughts. Rupert told me, if the time comes, you'll figure out how to open it yourself. He said you'd be smart enough. It was strange to hear those words. Rupert Telford, her father-in-law. She remembered him as a sick, quiet old man who rarely left his room. He almost never spoke to her, only sometimes looked at her with a long, sorrowful gaze. She had always thought he despised her, like everyone else in that house. But he had been thinking of her. He had trusted her. When Dorothy went back to her house, Vinette was left alone with the box. It became an obsession. She had to open it. She examined the lock from every side. Old, but strong. She tried prying the shackle with a hairpin she found on the shelf. Useless. She tried forcing the lid with a kitchen knife Dorothy had brought along with the food. The blade only bent. Time passed. The sun rose higher, its rays falling across the floor in a bright square. And Vinette kept sitting over the box as though it were some ancient artifact holding the answer to every question. What could be inside? Money? Rupert had been a wealthy man. He might have left her some emergency sum. Property documents? A will of some kind, one that might override Louise's wishes. The thought made her heartbeat quicken. That would be salvation. By midday Dorothy came again. She brought a plate of hot soup and looked troubled. There's news, she said, sitting on the edge of the bed. I went to the store. Ran into Linda from the third house. Vinette lifted her eyes to her. Linda was the main gossip of their street. Your Louise has already been at work, Dorothy went on, frowning. She's spread it all around. Says you had a nervous breakdown. That you attacked her and Martin, threatened to cut everyone up. Claims you chopped your own hair off in a fit. And then started demanding money, blackmailing poor congressmen. Says they called the police to send you to a mental hospital, but you ran away. Vinette listened, and the walls of the small room began to close in on her. Louise hadn't just thrown her out. She was destroying her name. Rewriting reality. In the eyes of the whole town they lived in, Vinette was no longer a victim but a madwoman, a dangerous hysteric. Her reputation, which had barely existed to begin with, was now crushed and trampled into the dirt. Anything she said now would be taken as the ravings of a lunatic. Louise had cut off every escape route, stripped her even of the right to truth. So stay put, keep your head down for now, Dorothy concluded. Let the storm pass. When her neighbor left, a new wave of despair washed over Vinette, but this time it was different. Bitter. Furious. She looked back at the box again. Now she had to open it not out of curiosity. She had to find a weapon inside. Something that could stand against Louise's lies. She went to Dorothy's shed. There, among old garden tools, she found what she needed, a heavy hammer and a thick, sturdy screwdriver. Returning to the room, she set the box on the floor, on the old rug, so as not to damage the boards. She wedged the tip of the screwdriver into the seam by the lock's hinge and struck the handle with the hammer. A dull thud. Then another. And another. She pounded with all her strength, pouring into each blow all her pain, her humiliation, her rage. The metal gave way slowly, with a creak. Finally, after one particularly hard strike, there was a loud crack. The hinge broke. She sank to her knees before the box. For several seconds she just stared at it, afraid to lift the lid. What if there was nothing inside? What if it was just an old container a sick man had handed to the neighbor for safekeeping? With a pounding heart she slowly raised the heavy lid. Inside there were no bundles of money, no legal documents in thick folders. At the bottom, on a lining of faded velvet, lay only one thing. A single object. It was an old, time-yellowed photograph. Vinette picked it up. The picture showed two people. A woman and a man. She recognized the woman instantly, even though she had only ever seen her in a single tiny, worn photo from her orphanage file. The same large, slightly sad eyes, the same line of lips, the same cheekbones. It was her biological mother. Young, incredibly beautiful. And beside her, holding her shoulder so tenderly and possessively, stood a man. He wasn't looking at the camera. He was looking at the woman next to him. And in his gaze there was so much warmth, so much adoration, so much undeniable, all-consuming love that Vinette's breath caught. It was Rupert Telford, her father-in-law. Vinette sat on the floor, on the old rug, staring at the photograph. The world around her ceased to exist. There was no Dorothy's outbuilding, no humiliation of the previous night, no fear of the future. There was only this photograph in her hands. Her entire life, all her 35 years, had been built on one simple, clear story. She was an orphan. The Telfords were benefactors. They had seen her in the orphanage, taken pity, and brought her into the family. Given her a roof over her head, food, a name. For that she was supposed to be grateful. To serve them, to endure. That was her duty. That story had been the foundation of her existence, the explanation for everything that happened to her. And now that foundation had cracked and crumbled to dust with one look at an old photograph. She traced her finger over her mother's face. Then over Rupert Telford's. Over his hand on her mother's shoulder. This was not the gesture of a passing acquaintance. It was the gesture of closeness, intimacy. The look with which he gazed at her left no doubt. This was love. Fragments of memories began to surface. The quiet, sickly father-in-law who looked at her with an unexplainable sorrow. His words, passed through Dorothy, "Give this to Vinette if my wife ever shows her true, cruel nature." He knew. He knew what Louise was capable of. And he wanted to protect Vinette. But why? Why her? She wasn't just some random orphan. She had been tied to this family long before they had brought her from the orphanage. Tied through her mother, through the love of her father-in-law. Inside her began to stir a suspicion so wild and monstrous that she was afraid to even let it take shape. But the photograph in her hands wouldn't let it vanish. It screamed of it. She needed to talk to Martin. It was madness. She was an outcast, a deranged blackmailer. Going near him was dangerous. But she had to. She had to see his reaction. To see his eyes when he looked at that photograph. Dorothy helped her. Her all-seeing window had served well once more. "Your Martin goes every day at lunch to the cafe on the corner," she told her that evening. "Alone. Sits there, drinks coffee. Seems he needs a break from his mommy. The next day Vinette was there. She wore Dorothy's old cardigan, pulled a scarf over her ruined head. She sat at a table in the farthest corner of the cafe, her back to the entrance, waiting. Her heart pounded so hard it echoed in her temples. Martin arrived right on schedule. He looked tired and irritable. He ordered an espresso and sat at a table by the window, staring at his phone. He wasn't expecting to see her. He was sure she was hiding somewhere, crushed and defeated. Vinette stood and walked over to his table. She silently placed the photograph in front of him, face up. He looked up, irritation flashing across his face. He was about to say something, probably to order her to leave. But then his gaze fell on the photograph. The reaction was instant. He froze. The color drained from his face. He stared at the picture, then at Vinette, then back at the picture. His hand holding the coffee cup trembled. He recognized it. He understood everything at once. Where did you get this?" he whispered. His voice sounded strange, choked. "That doesn't matter," Vinette answered quietly. "Who is this woman, Martin?" He didn't reply. He just stared at the photograph, and in his eyes was a mixture of shock, confusion, and something else, guilt. Deep, festering guilt. "Father, he had a woman," he finally forced out, not looking at Vinette. "Right before his illness. He changed then. Became happy, I guess. I'd never seen him like that. Mother was furious, she made scenes. She hired people, followed him. She found out who she was. But she never told me. She only repeated that it was some girl without family, without name, who wanted his money. And then she disappeared. And father got sick. Burned out in just a year." He fell silent, rubbed his face with his hand. It looked as if he might burst into tears. This strong, smug man who just yesterday had hacked off her hair to the laughter of a crowd now sat before her completely broken. "I never saw her face. Never knew who she was," he continued in a whisper. "Father never once spoke her name to me. He only said once. Said she was the only true love of his life." He lifted his eyes to her, full of tears. And in that moment she understood. She understood that her worst suspicion was true. "But that's not all, is it, Martin?" she asked, and her voice rang out hard as steel. "There's something else you know." He flinched. He looked away, his fingers gripping the edge of the table. He was struggling with himself. It was clear to see fear of his mother battling against the remnants of his conscience. "Martin," she repeated firmly. "Tell me." And he broke. He lowered his head onto the table, covering it with his hands, and his shoulders shook. He was crying. Soundlessly, but with his whole body. "Mother," his voice was muffled, distorted. "Mother knew everything. She knew from the very beginning." Vinette froze, her blood turning cold. He raised his head. His face was wet with tears, twisted in a grimace of despair and horror. "She didn't just find out father had a mistress. She found out they had a child. You. When father died, she spent a fortune, spent time and money to track you down. She found you in that orphanage." He was gasping for breath, the words barely coming out. "She didn't pity you, Vinette. She didn't do a good deed. She knew who you were. She adopted you deliberately." He looked her straight in the eyes, and in his gaze was the monstrous truth he had carried inside all these years. It was her revenge. Twisted, cruel, meant to last a lifetime. To take the daughter of her rival, the daughter of the man she hated for betraying her. To bring her into her house and make her a servant. To raise her before her eyes, humiliate her every day, watch her serve her son. That was her triumph. Every day she looked at you and she won, again and again. Vinette left the cafe, leaving Martin at the table with his head in his hands. She walked down the street, not seeing where she was going. The world around her was painted in sharp, painful colors. People, cars, shop windows, all of it drifted past like in a haze. Martin's confession brought no relief. It brought pain, but of another kind. Not the pain of a humiliated servant, but the pain of a deceived child. Her whole life had not just been hard and unfair. It had been a monstrous lie. A vicious play, thought out to the smallest detail, performed for decades. Louise had not merely failed to love her. She had hated her. Hated her not for clumsiness or supposed ingratitude. She had hated her as the image of her rival, the woman her husband had truly loved. She had hated the blood of Rupert Telford in her veins. Every time Louise yelled at her, forced her to scrub carpets or serve drinks to guests, she was taking revenge. Revenge on her dead rival and her dead husband through their daughter. Vinette reached Dorothy's outbuilding and locked herself in her little room. She lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. There were no more tears. No more despair. Deep inside, at the bottom of her scorched soul, something new began to grow. Cold, hard, sharp. Fury. But it was not the blind fury of a victim, it was focused, icy rage. She was no longer Vinette Graves, the orphan from the shelter. She was the daughter of Rupert Telford. And Louise, the woman who had built her whole life on vengeance, had taken everything from her. Her name. Her inheritance. The truth of her birth. Her life. She had to strike back. Not for revenge. For justice. For the young woman in the photograph, her mother. For the quiet, sorrowful old man, her father, who had tried to protect her but hadn't lived long enough. But how? What could she do? She was nobody. With no money, no connections, with the reputation of a madwoman. Louise and her congressman friend had the whole city in their grip. Any attempt to go through official channels was doomed. The police had already shown whose side they were on. And then she remembered. Remembered a name that had been on everyone's lips in their city a few years back. Ray Sterling. A local journalist. Not from the official, pampered newspapers, but one who ran his own small online outlet and dug into those everyone else was afraid to touch. Several years ago he had started an investigation into the Telford family's business dealings. It was about some shady schemes with city land, schemes involving both the late Rupert and Louise herself. The article had caused a stir. But then everything suddenly went quiet. Sterling's site was shut down under some flimsy pretext, and he himself disappeared from the city for a while. Everyone said Louise had broken him. Or bought him. Or scared him enough to make him forget the whole story. Vinette didn't know what had become of him. But he was her only chance. The man who had once already tried to fight the Telfords. Finding him wasn't easy. She had no phone, no internet. Once again, she turned to Dorothy. After listening, Dorothy frowned. Sterling. I remember him. Brave guy, raised quite a stir. Louise nearly lost her mind with rage back then. Where he is now, I don't know. But I've got a friend at the old print shop, maybe she knows something. A day later Dorothy brought her a crumpled scrap of paper. On it was an address and a phone number. He's no longer a journalist, Dorothy said. Works at some small company now, printing ads. They say he's been quieter than water, lower than grass since then. Looks like they broke him. The next day Vinette went to that address. It was on the outskirts of the city, in an industrial area. A small print shop huddled in the semi-basement of an old building. Inside it smelled of ink and dust. At a desk piled high with samples of business cards and advertising leaflets sat a man of about 45. Tired, with a deadened gaze. It was him. Ray Sterling. She walked up to the desk. Ray Sterling. He raised his eyes to her without much interest. That's me. Do you want to order business cards? No. I'm here for something else. My name is Vinette Graves. I'm Louise Telford's daughter-in-law. At that name Sterling flinched. His face changed instantly. Curiosity gave way to suspicion and poorly hidden fear. I don't do investigations anymore, he cut her off. I make business cards. If you need business cards, I'm at your service. If not, goodbye. He demonstratively turned back to his computer. Please, hear me out, Vinette's voice trembled. I have something that might interest you. I have no more interests, he replied sharply. Especially those connected with that family. They already destroyed my life once. I won't give them a second chance. They destroyed mine too, Vinette said quietly. A few days ago, at my husband's birthday, he and his mother, they humiliated me in front of all the guests. And among those guests was Congressman Abington. Sterling froze. Slowly, he turned back to her. In his eyes flickered a spark, that very spark of a journalist. Abington was there. He wasn't just there. He was watching and laughing. And then he called the police to have me arrested on false charges of blackmail. She told him everything. About the humiliation, about her hair being cut off, about the video she had recorded. About how the police had taken her phone. She didn't mention her father or the secret of her birth. That was too personal. She spoke only of what could be proven. Sterling listened without interrupting. His fingers drummed nervously on the desk. When she finished, he was silent for a long time. That's big, he finally said. A video where the Telford's friend, a congressman, takes part in such a show. That's a bombshell. If only we had it. He sighed, and the spark in his eyes faded again. But we don't. They have the phone. They've destroyed it, you can be sure. And without proof, all your words are just words. The words of a lunatic, which is surely how they've already painted you. Against the word of a congressman and one of the most powerful families in the city. We have nothing, Vinette. I'm sorry, really. But I can't help you. He said it with genuine regret. He believed her. But he was a realist. Without proof, it was a lost battle. Vinette stood in the middle of that dusty print shop, and the feeling of hopelessness began to smother her again. He was right. It was useless. The video had been her only trump card, and she had lost it. They had foreseen everything. She absent-mindedly slipped her hand into the pocket of Dorothy's old cardigan she had put on that morning. Her fingers touched something small, hard, with sharp edges. She frowned. She had worn this cardigan for days, but never noticed anything inside. And then it hit her like a jolt of electricity. Memories. Blurred, fragmented, from that chaotic moment in the living room. The struggle for the phone. Martin twisting her arm. Louise screeching. Realizing they were about to take the phone from her. And her finger, acting faster than her brain, feeling the tiny slot on the side of the device. Flicking it open with her nail. And the little memory card popping right into her palm. The very second Martin ripped the phone out of her hands, she had managed to clench her fist and slip it into her dress pocket. Back then she'd been wearing her black dress. Later, in the chaos at the station, in her despair on the bench, she had completely forgotten about it. Dorothy had given her that old cardigan, and Vinette had stuffed her dress into the bag her neighbor had brought from her pantry. Before leaving for the print shop she had simply moved everything from the dress pockets into the cardigan pockets without looking. The key, a kerchief, and something else. Something small and hard. Her hand froze in the pocket. She didn't believe it. She was afraid to believe it. Slowly, under Sterling's puzzled, questioning gaze, she pulled her hand out. In her palm lay a tiny black chip. A memory card. What's this? Sterling asked, leaning forward. Vinette couldn't speak. She just stared at that little piece of plastic. Her salvation. Her weapon. It had never been lost. It had been with her all along. Sterling snatched the card from her hand. His eyes darted feverishly around the room. He jumped to his desk, rummaged through the drawers. He pulled out a small device that looked like a flash drive, with a slot for a memory card. Card reader, he muttered, more to himself than to her. His hands trembled slightly as he slid the tiny card into the reader, then pushed the reader itself into the USB port of his old computer. A second of waiting. A new disk window appeared on the screen. There was only one file on it. Large. Recorded just a few days ago. Sterling double-clicked it. The screen lit up with an image. The Telford living room. A loud, cheerful party. Then came the sharp, furious voice of Louise. And everything began again. The insults. The laughter. Martin with the scissors. The hair falling to the floor. And in the background, in close focus, the smug, grinning face of Congressman Abington. The video was there, whole and untouched. The evidence was in their hands. They watched the video to the end in complete silence, broken only by the sounds from the computer speakers. The humiliation, the laughter, the snip of scissors. When the screen went dark, Sterling leaned back in his chair and exhaled for a long time. The fire in his eyes had flared up anew. It was the look of a hunter who had once again spotted prey. They think they destroyed it, he said, staring at the screen. They're sure you're disarmed. That gives us a huge advantage. He immediately made several copies of the file. One onto a flash drive, which he handed to Vinette, another onto his secure hard drive, and a third into a cloud storage account under a complicated password. The original he saved back onto the memory card. Hide this somewhere no one will ever find it. This is our main trump card. Vinette returned to Dorothy a different woman. Fear was gone, replaced by cold, ringing resolve. She hid the tiny memory card in the only place Louise would never snoop, sewn into the lining of an old, worn doll from the orphanage she had kept all these years. It was the only possession she had been allowed to take into her new life. The next 2 days she and Sterling worked out a plan. He was cautious. He knew who they were dealing with. Simply throwing the video online would be loud but pointless. The Telfords and Abington would immediately declare it fake, a doctored fabrication by a vengeful madwoman. They would unleash all their resources to discredit the recording and its source. We won't strike head-on, Sterling said. We'll act like a python. Slowly, but inexorably. Our first target isn't Louise. She's too sure of herself, too well protected. Our target is the weakest link. Congressman Abington. The plan was simple and elegant. The next day, a short article appeared on a small but popular city news site owned by an old friend of Sterling's. It carried no names. It was titled, "Indecent Games of the City Elite." The piece spoke of a recent private party attended by a very prominent local politician known for championing family values. It described how, at that party, a deeply unpleasant and humiliating scene had unfolded, and how, according to rumor, there existed a video recording of the incident. The article ended with a rhetorical question: how would voters react if such a recording ever became public? It was a grenade with the pin pulled, thrown into the stagnant swamp of city politics. The effect exceeded all expectations. The article spread across social networks and messengers. Speculation immediately began about which politician it referred to. Abington's name surfaced among the first. People recalled his close friendship with Martin Telford, whose birthday had just recently been celebrated. The fire was lit. Small, but with enough smoke for everyone to smell it. Vinette waited. She knew he would bite. Abington was a careerist to the core. His reputation was everything to him. A scandal, especially one this sordid, could bury his political ambitions forever. 3 days passed. 3 days of tense silence. Vinette barely left Dorothy's outbuilding, afraid of drawing attention to herself. On the 4th day, late in the evening, a nondescript dark car pulled up to Dorothy's house. A man in a suit stepped out, someone Vinette had never seen before. He walked up to the gate and spoke to Dorothy, who was watering flowers in the garden. He asked for Vinette Graves. Dorothy called her out. The man did not introduce himself. He simply handed her a mobile phone. "You're wanted on the line," he said curtly. Vinette took the phone. On the other end was the familiar voice of Congressman Abington, full of thinly veiled panic. "Vinette, we need to meet. Urgently." He wasn't threatening. He wasn't shouting. He was pleading. It was the first small victory. "I don't think we have anything to talk about," she answered as coldly as Sterling had taught her. "Please," his voice cracked with desperation. "This is in your own interest. I want to help you. To solve your problem." They agreed to meet the next day. In a deserted place, a park on the edge of town. Sterling was against it. "It's a trap," he said. "They could try to do something to you." "They won't," Vinette replied. "As long as they believe I'm alone, and that the recording is with me, I'm relatively safe. To them, I'm a ticking time bomb. They'll try to defuse me, not blow me up." The meeting took place. Abington was waiting for her on a bench by an abandoned fountain. He looked terrible. Pale, with dark circles under his eyes. All his usual political arrogance was gone. He resembled a cornered animal. He began indirectly. Spoke of how sorry he was about what had happened. How Martin and Louise were hot-tempered people, but deep down not bad. That everyone had overreacted. That he was ready to help her start a new life, to move to another state. Vinette listened silently to this nonsense. "What are you getting at, Maxwell?" she cut him off. He flinched. And got to the point. "I understand you're struggling now. You've been left without means to live. I'm prepared to fix that." He named the sum. It was enormous. The kind of money that could change anyone's life. For it he wanted very little, for Vinette to disappear from the city forever, hand over the memory card, and sign a non-disclosure agreement stating she had no claims against the Telford family or him personally. "Understand, this is your only way out," he pressed. "Louise will never forgive you. She will destroy you, grind you into dust. She's already begun. And I'm offering you salvation. Money, freedom, a new life. Think about it. This is my last and only conversation with you." Vinette pretended to hesitate. She stared at the ground, twisting a handkerchief in her fingers. I don't know," she whispered. "I need to think." "Think quickly," he snapped. "I'm giving you 24 hours. Tomorrow, same time, at Café Central. Bring the card, sign the papers, take the money, and leave. If you don't show, consider your choice made." He stood up and left quickly, without looking back. Vinette immediately went to Sterling. After listening, he rubbed his hands together, his eyes burning with excitement. "Got you, little bird. He's ready to pay. Which means he's scared to death." "What do we do?" Vinette asked. "What we must," Sterling smirked. "We'll bait the trap." The next day, an hour before the appointed time, Vinette and Sterling were already at Café Central. It was a popular, always crowded spot in the very center of the city. The perfect stage for their play. Sterling hadn't come alone. With him was a short, fidgety guy carrying a large backpack. "This is Kevin," Sterling introduced. "Best photographer in the city. One of those who can shoot without being noticed." They sat at a table in the corner. Sterling and Kevin. Vinette took a seat at a table in the middle of the hall, ordering herself a cup of coffee. She sat with her back to them, but she knew they were there. That gave her strength. Right on time Abington walked into the cafe. He was carrying a bulky black case. He looked around nervously and hurried to Vinette's table. "Alone?" he hissed. Vinette nodded. "Where's the card?" She pulled out an old, empty memory card Sterling had given her and placed it on the table. Abington snatched it without looking and shoved it into his pocket. Then he put a folder of papers on the table. "Sign." Vinette took the pen. Her hand trembled slightly, but this time from excitement, not fear. She pretended to read, then signed every page. Abington snatched the folder back, checked the signatures, and nodded. "Here." He pushed the black case across the table toward her. "Everything's as agreed. Take it and get out of this city. And may I never see you again." He was about to get up and leave. But Vinette stopped him. She didn't touch the case. She rose slowly from her chair. Her whole body was taut as a bowstring. She looked straight at him. And her voice, carried by the cafe's acoustics, rang out loud and clear, making nearby patrons turn their heads. "Congressman Abington, I will not be silenced by your dirty money." Abington froze. His face twisted in horror. He realized it was a trap. Vinette raised her voice so the entire cafe could hear, "I will not take this bribe. And you will not make me silent." At that moment she heard the quiet but rapid clicks. Kevin was at work. From his corner he was capturing every frame like a sniper. Abington's terrified face, the case of money on the table, the folder of documents, Vinette's hand firmly pushing the case away. Abington bolted for the exit, knocking over his chair. He ran like a criminal caught red-handed. And Vinette stood in the middle of the cafe, every eye fixed on her. In that moment she was no longer the victim. She was the accuser, and her trial was only beginning. When they stepped out of the cafe, adrenaline was still pounding in her temples. Sterling was ecstatic. Kevin, the photographer, silently handed him the memory card from his camera, nodded, and slipped quickly into the crowd. "We've got everything," Sterling said, his eyes blazing. "The face, the money, the handoff. He's a political corpse." The next morning the photograph was on the front page of the same news portal. The shot was a masterpiece, taken from the perfect angle. In the foreground, Abington's panicked, contorted face. On the table before him, the half-open black case, bundles of cash visible inside. And Vinette, standing above him, her head held high, her hand frozen in a decisive gesture of refusal. The headline was short and devastating, "The Price of Silence." Congressman Abington makes an offer that could be refused. The explosion was deafening. This time there were no hints, no ambiguities. It was a direct accusation, backed by undeniable evidence. By midday, the scandal was the talk of the entire city. Regional television channels picked up the story. Abington's press office muttered something incoherent about a staged provocation and photo manipulation, but the picture spoke for itself. The congressman's career, built on slogans of honesty and order, was collapsing before everyone's eyes like a house of cards. Vinette could taste the intoxicating sweetness of her first real victory. She had struck, and the blow had landed. She thought Louise would be furious. She had no idea how furious. Louise didn't call or threaten. She didn't start a public spat. She started a war. A total war of annihilation. The first strike came where Vinette least expected it. For years, just to have some small outlet and a trickle of her own money, she had worked a few times a week as an assistant in the local school library. It was quiet, steady work that Louise had graciously allowed because it didn't interfere with her main duties at the house. It was her small island of normal life. The phone rang at Dorothy's house. It was the school principal, a woman Vinette had known for years. Her voice was frightened and apologetic. "Vinette, dear, I'm sorry," she began without preamble. "I don't know what happened with you, but I just got a call from the education board. They hinted about your mental instability." Vinette froze. "What? What instability?" "They said you pose a threat to children," the principal's voice shook. "They said if I don't get your resignation today, the school will have big problems at the next certification. You understand, I can't take that risk." Vinette understood everything. Louise's reach was long. She had her people everywhere. She wasn't just destroying Vinette's reputation among acquaintances, she was making her an outcast on an official level. "I understand, Maria. Write the dismissal order." She hung up. It hurt. Louise had taken from her the only place where she didn't feel like a servant. The second strike followed a few hours later. A man in a strict business suit came to Dorothy's gate. He formally introduced himself as a bailiff and handed Vinette a sealed envelope. Inside was a restraining order. An official paper with a seal prohibiting Vinette Graves from coming within 100 meters of the Telford house or its family members, Martin and Louise. The grounds listed: aggressive behavior, threats, and attempted blackmail, confirmed by a police statement filed by Abington. It was a knockout blow. Louise hadn't just changed the locks. She had built a wall between Vinette and her past life, fortified by the law. Now any appearance on their street could be treated as a violation of a court order. In the eyes of the law, she was a criminal. That evening Vinette sat in her little room in complete numbness. The joy of her victory over Abington had evaporated. Louise was a far more dangerous opponent. She didn't panic. She struck back, coldly, deliberately, at the most painful spots. She was cornering Vinette, stripping her of work, money, reputation, even the right to move freely around the city. She was once again alone, isolated, defenseless. The next day she decided to collect the few personal belongings she had left at the school: a book she had been reading, a mug, a spare pair of shoes. She arranged with the principal to come after classes so she wouldn't run into any children or teachers. The school was empty and echoing. She slipped quietly into the library, packed her things into a bag. She felt like a thief in the place she had worked for so many years. Just as she was about to leave, the door creaked softly. On the threshold stood Helen, one of the teachers, a woman her own age with whom she had shared decent, if not close, relations. Helen looked frightened. She hurried inside and closed the door behind her. "Vinette, hi," she whispered. "I saw the news. It's awful, what they're doing to you. The whole town is buzzing. Nobody believes this nonsense about instability, of course. Everyone knows whose hand is behind it." "Thank you, Helen," Vinette answered wearily. "But it doesn't matter anymore." "It matters," Helen said firmly. She glanced nervously at the door and handed Vinette a large, dusty cardboard folder. "Here, take this." Vinette looked at the folder in surprise. "What is it?" "I don't know if it will help," Helen whispered. "My father was an architect. He died 5 years ago, and I still haven't sorted through his archive. Yesterday, when I heard about your dismissal, I suddenly remembered he once worked with the Telfords. I spent all night digging through his papers and found this." Vinette opened the folder. Inside were old, yellowed sheets of drawing paper. Blueprints, plans. She looked closer at the stamp in the corner. Project, Telford Family Country House. The very house Louise hated to visit. The house built more than 30 years ago. "I don't know if there's anything useful here," Helen said. "But maybe." She picked up one of the sheets and pointed to the signature line at the bottom of the drawing. "Here. Look." Vinette bent closer. In the "General Contractor" line was a bold, confident signature, and neatly printed next to it the name, Benedict Telford. Vinette looked at Helen in confusion. "Benedict? Not Rupert?" His name was Rupert. Exactly, Helen nodded, her eyes flashing seriously. It wasn't him. It was Benedict. Benedict Telford. Louise's brother. Vinette stared at the signature, and in her mind something new began to take shape. Benedict Telford. Louise's brother. She knew almost nothing about him. In all her 15 years in the Telford house, she had seen him only a couple of times at family gatherings long ago. He was a quiet, unremarkable man who always kept to the shadow of his domineering sister. Louise had never spoken of him, and if she did mention him, it was with thinly veiled contempt. A failure, she once tossed out at dinner. All that was known was that they had some old scores between them and barely spoke at all. But 30 years ago, according to the documents, he had been the chief contractor for the construction of the country house. That meant he knew the house like the back of his hand. Every nail, every board had passed through his hands. Vinette returned to Dorothy's with the dusty folder tucked under her arm. She told her about the discovery. Dorothy frowned, remembering Benedict. Of course I remember him. Quiet, always guilty-looking. Louise picked on him his whole life. He was in debt to Rupert, I think. Took money for some business of his, went bust, and then worked off the debt building the house. Rupert took pity on him, gave him the job. And Louise was furious he helped his brother. The thought of the house wouldn't let Vinette go. That house Louise hated so much. She almost never went there, always said it was filled with bad memories. After Rupert's death the house stood abandoned. Martin went a couple of times with friends for barbecues, but no more. The house stood out there in the forest, silent, forgotten, keeping its secrets. If Rupert Telford had wanted to hide something from his wife, there was no better place. We have to get inside, Vinette said firmly. How? Dorothy sighed. The locks must have been changed a dozen times. And you've got a restraining order. If anyone sees you there, that's it, prison. Vinette's resolve faltered. But suddenly Dorothy narrowed her eyes slyly. Who said it has to be you there? I'll go. An old lady out for mushrooms, got lost, stumbled onto an abandoned house. What can they do to me? She stood up, went to an old dresser, and rummaged in the top drawer. After a moment she came back, holding out a bundle of old, darkened keys. Here. Vinette stared at the keys in confusion. Rupert gave them to me, Dorothy explained calmly. Along with the box. He said, it may happen, Dorothy, that Vinette will need to get into the house or the country house, and they won't let her. Keep these for her. It was as if he had foreseen everything. Calculated every move of his wife in advance. The next morning, in Dorothy's son's old car, they drove out of the city. Dorothy herself was behind the wheel. Vinette sat beside her, a scarf pulled over her head and dark glasses hiding her face. She felt like a spy in a cheap detective story. The farther they got from the city, the calmer she felt. Here, among the forests and fields, Louise's power seemed to weaken. The country house was in a remote place, far from the road. An old two-story timber house, blackened with age, surrounded by towering pines. The yard was overgrown with weeds, paint peeled from the window frames. It was clear no one had set foot here in years. They approached from the back, leaving the car in the bushes. Dorothy stepped up to the door and began trying the keys. The third one turned with a groan. The door gave way, and they stepped inside. The house smelled of dust, damp, and old wood. Furniture was shrouded in white covers like burial shrouds. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling beams. The silence was so thick it felt like you could drown in it. They began the search. Systematically, room by room. They checked everything, old wardrobes, dresser drawers, bookshelves. They tapped the walls, looked under the beds. But they found only dust, mouse droppings, and forgotten things of no value. Hours passed. The sun dipped low, filling the house with twilight. Nothing, Dorothy said with disappointment, sitting down on a couch covered with a sheet. Empty. Maybe we were wrong. Vinette too felt exhaustion and disappointment. She stood in Rupert Telford's study. A great oak desk, bookshelves up to the ceiling. If anywhere, it was here he would have left something. She ran her hand along the spines of the books. Classics, technical works, reference guides. Nothing personal. She was about to leave when her foot caught on the edge of an old, worn carpet in the middle of the room. She stumbled, almost fell. Annoyed at her clumsiness, she kicked the rug. And then she noticed it. One of the floorboards beneath was just slightly uneven. A couple of millimeters higher than the others. Almost invisible, but in the slanting rays of the setting sun the tiny gap cast a long shadow. Vinette's heart skipped. She dropped to her knees and pulled back the heavy, dusty edge of the carpet. Yes. One board was shorter than the rest, with a small drilled hole at the side. Just enough for a finger. A hiding place. She pried it up with her finger and pulled hard. The board gave way with a creak. Beneath was a small compartment lined with dark fabric. Inside lay a neat stack of letters, tied with a faded silk ribbon. Her hands trembled as she pulled them out. The paper was old but well preserved. She untied the ribbon and lifted the top letter. The handwriting was familiar, masculine, confident. Rupert Telford's hand. "My dearest, my only Claire," the letter began. Claire. Her mother's name was Claire. Vinette began to read. They were love letters. Filled with tenderness, longing, and fear. He wrote of his life with Louise, calling it a golden prison. He wrote of his love for Claire, of how she was the only light in his life. And he wrote of her. Of Vinette. Our little Vinette took her first step today. You sent me the photograph, and I haven't been able to stop looking at it all day. She has your eyes. I cannot be near you, my love, that viper watches my every move. But I swear to you, the day will come, and we will be together. All of us. Our family. Vinette went through the letters, one after another. In each of them he spoke of her. Our daughter. Our treasure. And then she came across one, written in a different hand, shakier, more anxious. He must have written it when he was already ill. I feel I do not have much time left. Louise is plotting something, she will never forgive me for you. She will take away from our daughter everything that belongs to her by right. I must protect her. I have made my decision, Claire. I have rewritten everything. The greater part of my estate I leave to Vinette. I cannot do this openly, my wife would contest any will. But I have found a way. I have prepared everything with the help of a trusted friend. I must keep it hidden from my vengeful wife until the time comes. When our little girl needs help, it will all be revealed. He never made it. The time never came. Or perhaps it had come only now. She sat on the dusty floor of the abandoned house, tears streaming down her face. But these were not tears of grief or humiliation. They were tears of belated love. Her father, the man she had thought of as distant and cold, had loved her. He had thought of her, tried to protect her. He had left her not just money, he had left her proof of her truth, her story. She and Dorothy returned to the city late at night. Vinette did not sleep until morning. She read and reread the letters, absorbing every word. She held in her hands the life of her parents, their secret, tragic love story. And within that story was a promise. A promise of justice. I have found a way. I have prepared everything with the help of a trusted friend. Who was this friend? Who could have been close enough to Rupert Telford for him to entrust such a dangerous secret? Someone Louise would never suspect. Then she remembered the folder of blueprints. The signature in the corner. Benedict Telford. Louise's brother. The man Rupert had given work to when he was ruined. The man his own sister despised. The perfect candidate for a secret ally. The link between them was obvious, the country house. The place that tied them together. The place where Rupert had hidden the letters. Perhaps Benedict had even helped him create the hiding place. Finding Benedict turned out to be even harder than finding Sterling. He was not a public man. His name appeared in no records. Sterling, when Vinette asked him for help, only spread his hands. After the whole business with the house and the bankruptcy, he just vanished off the radar. All I know is he never recovered. Lives somewhere on the outskirts, scraping by on odd jobs. His sister refuses to help him, out of principle. Dorothy came to the rescue again. Her network of old lady spies worked better than any secret service. 2 days later Vinette had an address. An old concrete apartment block in the most rundown part of the city. She went there alone. She felt this had to be a conversation face to face. The door to the apartment was padded with cracked, peeling vinyl. Vinette hesitated for a long time before pressing the buzzer. What would she say to him? How would she even begin? At last she dared. The door did not open right away. On the threshold stood an elderly, stooped man. Thin, with a pale, lined face and sunken, weary eyes. He resembled Louise in some faint, indefinable way. But there was none of her authority, none of her energy. He looked broken. Benedict? Vinette asked softly. He nodded, looking at her with a questioning gaze. He did not recognize her. My name is Vinette. I am the wife of your nephew, Martin. At these words his face hardened. He moved as if to shut the door. I want nothing from your family, he said flatly. Please, Vinette rushed to say, this is very important. It has nothing to do with Louise. It has to do with Rupert. The name of his brother-in-law froze him. He looked at her long and searchingly, then silently stepped aside and let her into the apartment. It was small and poor. Old furniture, piles of books on the floor, the smell of medicine. He led her to the kitchen, just as cramped and cluttered. They sat at a little table covered with oilcloth. What do you want? He asked indifferently. Vinette did not circle around. She took the bundle of letters from her bag, tied with the ribbon, and laid it on the table. I found this in the country house, she said. Benedict looked at the letters, and his face changed. He knew them. His hands, resting on the table, began to tremble. Where, how did you find them? That doesn't matter now. What matters is what they say. Read them. He hesitated, then took the bundle. Untied the ribbon. Lifted the top letter and began to read. Vinette watched waves of emotion wash across his face. Surprise, pain, recognition. He read for a long time, one letter after another. The silence in the little kitchen was almost palpable. When he reached the last letter, he set them aside and stared into space. His shoulders sagged lower. He looked like a man on whom the weight of all his years had suddenly collapsed. I knew, he whispered. I knew he loved her. He was not just my brother-in-law. He was my friend. The only one who stood by me when I lost everything. He trusted me. And I failed him. In the letter he speaks of a trusted friend who helped him arrange everything, Vinette said slowly, meeting his eyes. That was you, Benedict. He lifted his gaze to her. Tears brimmed in his eyes. He gave a silent nod. Yes. It was me. Vinette felt she was standing on the threshold of the greatest secret of all. What exactly did he arrange? What did you help him do? Benedict drew a deep breath, as if summoning strength. It was as though he had just made some important decision for himself. He didn't just write letters, Vinette. He acted. He understood that Louise was a wolf. And that she would never give up what she considered hers. Least of all to you. He fell silent, searching for the right words. 6 months before his death, when he already knew he was ill, he called me. We met in secret at the office of an old, trusted notary. Louise thought he was going to treatments. His voice grew quieter, almost conspiratorial. Rupert didn't just talk about leaving you his fortune. He did it. He made a second will. Vinette froze, barely daring to breathe. A second will? Yes, Benedict said firmly. Absolutely legal. Notarized. In it he annulled all previous instructions. According to this will, almost all his personal assets, stocks, accounts, property that wasn't in Louise's name, everything was left to you, Vinette. He hesitated, remembering Vinette Graves. That's how it was written. To Louise and Martin went only the house they lived in and a few paltry sums in the accounts. It was his retribution. And his justice. But why did no one ever know? Why, after his death, did the other will come into force? Because we hid it, Benedict said. The original remained with the notary, to be held until further instruction. That notary was already very old, and he died a year after Rupert. And his archive. Louise made sure it landed in the right hands and was properly taken care of. She was always afraid of everything, always checked everything. She destroyed the original. She was certain she had destroyed it all. Vinette felt the hope that had just flared within her begin to die out again. Then it's all lost. The document is gone. Benedict fixed her with a long, heavy look. The original is gone. He rose slowly, walked to an old cabinet, rummaged through its depths, and returned. He laid on the table a yellowed sheet of paper folded into quarters. But I was the official witness at the signing. And by law, I had the right to a copy. Rupert insisted that I take one. He said, "Keep it safe, Benedict. If anything happens to me, one day it will become a weapon in my daughter's hands." He unfolded the paper. It was a notarized copy. Signed by Rupert Telford. Signed by the notary. Signed by the witness, Benedict Telford. And sealed with a blue stamp. "I kept it all these years," Benedict said, his voice trembling. "I was afraid. Afraid of my sister, afraid of her vengeance. I convinced myself it was better this way. That the past should not be stirred up. I tormented myself, Vinette. Every night I saw Rupert's eyes. He begged me, and I kept silent. I was a coward. But now I can't be silent any longer." Vinette walked down the street, and in her pocket lay 2 treasures, the bundle of letters and the folded copy of the will. The air outside felt different, lighter, fresher. For the first time in a long while she could breathe fully. This was no longer just the rebellion of a humiliated woman. This was a battle for inheritance, for her rightful inheritance. She no longer had only emotions and suspicions. She had documents. And she had a witness. A living witness, ready to speak. The blood brother of her greatest enemy. She met with Sterling immediately. When she laid the letters and the copy of the will on the table before him, he was struck speechless. He studied the documents for a long time, examining every letter, every signature. "If this is authentic, and your new uncle is willing to confirm everything in court," he shook his head, his eyes gleaming. "Vinette, do you realize what this means? This isn't just a scandal. This is an earthquake. You won't just reclaim your good name. You'll take everything from them." But for such a battle, a journalist wasn't enough. She needed a gladiator. A legal gladiator. "I know such a man," Sterling said. "His name is Thomas Hallett. The best inheritance lawyer in the region. Expensive, but worth it. He loves these kinds of cases. Cases that reek of big money and great injustice. I'll call him. I'll tell him we've got the case of his life. The meeting with Halid took place the next day in his office. The office matched his reputation, in the very center of the city, with panoramic windows, expensive furniture, and an oppressive atmosphere of power and confidence. Halid himself was a man in his 50s, with a hard, piercing gaze and the manners of a predator. He wasted no time on pleasantries. Vinette, Sterling, and Benedict, whom Vinette had persuaded to come along, sat across from him. Halid, expressionless, silently studied all the documents Vinette laid on his desk, the copy of the will, the letters, even the old blueprints of the country house. Then he spent nearly an hour interrogating Benedict. He asked short, precise questions, cross-checking his answers against the dates in the letters and documents. Benedict held firm. It seemed that once he had made his decision, it freed him from years of fear. He spoke calmly and with confidence. When the questioning ended, Halid leaned back in his chair. "Well then," he said, the first words he had spoken in almost an hour. "The picture is clear. We have a notarized copy of the will. We have a living witness whose signature is on the document. We have letters that confirm the testator's intentions and explain his motives. And we have the respondent, Louise Telford, who obviously knew of the existence of the second will and entered into the inheritance under the previous, invalid one." He paused, fixing his gaze on Vinette. "This case can be won. It will be loud, dirty, and long. They will fight like wild beasts. They will try to destroy you, Benedict, all of us. Are you ready for that?" "I'm ready," Vinette said firmly. Benedict gave a silent nod. "Good," Halid said. A shadow of a smile flickered across his lips. "Then we begin the war." Halid's first move was calculated for maximum public effect. He did not send the documents by mail. He chose his moment. A week later, at the most expensive restaurant in the city, the annual charity luncheon took place under Louise's patronage. It was the premier social event of the year. The entire city elite gathered there to display their generosity and their gowns. Louise was in her element, she was the queen of this ball. At the very height of the event, while the mayor was delivering a laudatory speech in Louise's honor for her charitable work, two men entered the hall, Halid's assistant in a strict suit and a court officer in uniform. They walked silently across the entire room, straight to the head table where Louise presided. Under the flashing bulbs of society photographers and in the stunned silence of the hall, the lawyer's assistant handed Louise a thick packet of documents. "Louise Telford," he said loudly and clearly. "You are hereby served with an official claim disputing the inheritance rights to the estate of the late Rupert Telford." A dead silence fell over the room. Someone dropped a fork. Louise's face froze, turning into a porcelain mask. She stared at the packet of documents as if it were a living snake. Martin, seated beside her, went pale and sank into his chair. The news exploded across the city. It was far louder than the Abington scandal. The Telford inheritance, contested by a daughter-in-law, the very same woman Louise had branded insane and thrown out of the house. The newspapers and news portals went into a frenzy. Sterling, acting as chief media sponsor, poured oil on the fire, publishing anonymous leaks about a mysterious second will and a witness from among the closest relatives. The city buzzed like a disturbed hive. Everyone waited to see how Louise would respond. The answer came 3 days later. And it was devastating. Halid called Vinette himself. His voice was serious, without a trace of his former confidence. "They've struck back," he said. "Their lawyers just sent us the official response to our claim." "And what's in it?" Vinette asked, her heart stopping. "They're not disputing the authenticity of the signatures on the copy of the will. They're striking at the most crucial point. At the testator's capacity." "What does that mean?" "It means," Halid's voice hardened, "they presented a medical report. Official. Signed and sealed. It states that in the last year of his life, Rupert Telford suffered from rapidly progressing dementia and senile cognitive decline." Vinette sat in silence, unable to form words. "That's a lie," she finally managed. "He was sick physically, but his mind was clear." "I know," Khaled said. "But they have a paper. Signed and dated. According to that document, any will drawn up during that period is null and void, as the person was not of sound mind. They claim that you, or your mother, or someone else exploited his condition to trick him into signing this paper. And they have evidence. An official medical affidavit. And there's nothing we can do against it. In court, paper always beats words." Khaled's words fell like a sentence. Medical affidavit. Dementia. Not of sound mind. Louise had delivered a gut punch, knocking the breath from their lungs. She wasn't just defending herself, she was rewriting history once more, turning Vinette's father's final will into the delusions of a senile old man, and Vinette herself into a fraud who had taken advantage of his illness. It was a brilliant and monstrous move. It invalidated everything, the will, the letters. The love letters could now be read as proof that Vinette's father had lost his grip on reality. Benedict, once the key witness, was recast as an accomplice in fraud. The next day they gathered in Khaled's office, Vinette, pale as a sheet, Benedict, stricken, and a grim-faced Sterling. The atmosphere was crushing. Victory, which had seemed so close, was now slipping through their fingers. "They planned all of this," Khaled said, pacing the office. "They prepared for it. It's possible Louise obtained this report right after her husband's death. Just in case. She always insures herself." He placed a copy of the medical report on the table. "The signature is real. The doctor is Dr. Lars Gatiss, a neurologist, a respected specialist. Chief physician of the private clinic Health Plus. His reputation is trusted. If he testifies in court that he personally observed signs of dementia in Rupert, we're finished. We won't be able to disprove it." "But it's a lie." Benedict cried out. "I was with Rupert a week before his death. We discussed business, he gave me advice. His body was weak, but his mind was sharper than mine." "I believe you, Benedict," Khaled said wearily. "But the court will believe the document. And a respected doctor." Vinette stared at the paper. At the steady, confident signature of Dr. Gatiss. In her memory rose the final months of her father's life. Yes, he had been weak. He slept a lot, sometimes slurred his words from medication. Louise had completely isolated him then. She let no one in, citing his severe condition. She gave him his injections, his pills. She said she was following the doctor's instructions. Now it became clear what kind of doctors and what prescriptions those were. She hadn't been treating him. She had been creating the picture of his madness. "Is there really nothing we can do?" Vinette asked quietly. Khaled stopped. "We could try digging into this doctor. Find something that would make the court doubt his objectivity. But that's almost impossible. He's clean, I've already checked. Perfect biography, no scandals." At that moment Sterling finally spoke. He had been silent the whole time, studying the copy of the report intently. "Give me this," he said, taking the paper from Khaled. "I'll check a few things too. Through my channels." The next few days were torture. Louise's lawyers were pressing the court, demanding preliminary hearings. In the press they controlled, articles began to appear about a brazen attempt to deceive the grieving widow and about dubious documents surfacing out of nowhere. They were shaping public opinion, preparing the ground for their victory. Vinette felt the noose around her neck tightening with every passing day. Sterling vanished. He didn't answer calls, didn't show up. Vinette feared he had given up, that he realized the battle was lost and decided not to risk himself. On the fourth day, he called late at night, "Come over." His voice on the line was strange, excited and furious at once. "Now." Vinette rushed to his print shop. Sterling was sitting at his desk, buried under internet printouts, extracts, and photographs. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "I found it," he said without lifting his head. "I found the thread." He turned the monitor toward her. On the screen was a page from the local society photo archive, dated 3 years back. The picture showed a wedding. A happy groom and bride. "Look closely," Sterling said. Vinette leaned in. She didn't recognize the groom. But the bride, her face seemed vaguely familiar. "That's Dr. Gaddis's daughter," Sterling explained. "She married 3 years ago. It was a lavish wedding, the whole town buzzed about it." "And?" Vinette asked, not understanding. "Now look who's standing next to the couple." He jabbed his finger at the screen. This smug, well-fed gentleman hugging the groom. "Recognize him?" Vinette looked closely. Her heart skipped a beat. Next to the groom, playing the role of either honored guest or close family, stood Congressman Maxwell Abington. "That proves nothing," she said, though cold dread settled inside her. "He could have just been a guest." "He could have," Sterling agreed. "If the groom weren't his blood nephew." And now, the cherry on top. He opened another tab. It was an extract from the corporate registry. The founders of the Health Plus Clinic. 3 names, Dr. Gaddis and 2 unknowns with unremarkable surnames. "I checked those 2, Sterling said, his voice hardening. "They're fronts. One is Abington's driver, the other is his aide's wife. But here's the best part." He showed her another document, an amendment to the list of founders. 2 years ago, Abington, through his people, entered the clinic's ownership. And a year ago, right after the report on Rupert Telford's dementia was issued, Dr. Gaddis's share in the clinic's capital magically tripled. At the expense of Abington's people. They had simply gifted him part of their business. Vinette stared at the charts and documents, and the monstrous picture began to come together. This wasn't just Louise's revenge. This was a conspiracy. Complex, multi-layered, meticulously planned. "Abington," she whispered. "Yes," Sterling nodded. "Our congressman, he wasn't just at the wrong place at the wrong time at that party. He's been a key player in this game from the start." Vinette remembered his panic when she mentioned the video. His desperate attempt to buy her silence. He wasn't only afraid for his reputation. He was afraid that if the scandal exploded, someone would start digging. And they'd uncover his connection with Louise. Their shared secret. Louise couldn't have pulled this off on her own, Sterling continued, laying out the logic. Convincing a respected doctor to commit professional fraud, to falsify a diagnosis, that requires enormous influence. Administrative clout. Which she didn't have. But Abington did. He secured the medical report she needed. He was her guarantor, her cover. And she, in return, had to guarantee him something back. Money. Political support. A share in the Telford business once she took full control of the inheritance. They were in collusion. And the bribe he offered you wasn't just hush money for the party. It was hush money for the entire scheme. He wasn't trying to save his reputation. He was trying to save their multimillion-dollar fraud. Sterling's discovery changed everything. This was no longer just a battle over an inheritance. It was the exposure of a criminal conspiracy. On one side of the scales stood Vinette with a copy of the will and a stack of old letters. On the other, Louise, Congressman Abington, and Dr. Gaddis, bound together by mutual cover and millions at stake. When Hallett received Sterling's new findings, his spirit revived. "Now we have a game." He slammed his fist on the table. "We're no longer defending, we're attacking. We won't try to prove Rupert was of sound mind. We'll prove the diagnosis was fabricated as part of a criminal conspiracy." The court hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Those 2 weeks felt like the calm before a storm. Louise's lawyers carried themselves with smug confidence. They were certain of their bulletproof defense, of the medical report. They had no idea Hallett was preparing a surprise for them. Khaled and Sterling worked as a team. Sterling kept digging, searching for any links between Louise and Gaddis, any evidence of their contact. Khaled built the legal foundation, crafting the line of attack. He planned to call not only Benedict as a witness, but also Sterling himself, who would testify under oath about his investigation. And as the finishing touch, he intended to petition the court to summon Congressman Abington to testify. "He'll lie, he'll squirm like a worm on a hot skillet," Khaled said. But the very fact of his presence in this case, side by side with Gaddis and Louise, will already cast a shadow on them all. "We'll tie them into one knot." Vinette observed the preparations from the sidelines. She had done all she could, she had found the letters, the will, the witness. Now everything was in the professionals' hands. But she felt that in this complex scheme one element was still missing. The weakest link. Martin. She thought of him. Of how he had cried in the cafe, confessing the truth to her. There was a crack inside him. He was weak, cowardly, entirely dependent on his mother. And yet something human still lingered in him. Fear. And guilt. Louise was a monolith, a rock. Martin was sand, ready to crumble at any moment. Sterling didn't publish the investigation about Abington and Gaddis. That was his trump card, reserved for the courtroom. Instead, he played a subtler, crueler move. Through his channels, he leaked a single document to the same news portal. Not official, no seals. Just a printout of a bank transaction. It showed how, from the account of one of Louise's shell companies, a large sum of money had been transferred to Dr. Lars Gaddis's personal account 2 weeks ago. A very large sum. The payment description was a modest, consultation fee. It was a bomb. There was no direct proof it was payment for the fake medical report. But the date of the transfer, right after Vinette filed her lawsuit, and the absurdly large, consultation fee, screamed the truth. It reeked of corruption. Strong, undeniable. The news reached the Telfords that very evening. Vinette could only imagine what was happening inside their house. She knew Louise. Louise was probably raging, not with fear, but with fury at the audacity. She was convinced her money and connections would fix anything. She'd scream it was fake, a provocation, the work of enemies. Her confidence was unshakable. But Martin must have been terrified. Truly terrified. Unlike his mother, he wasn't a fighter. He was an ordinary, weak man, accustomed to comfort. And now he had seen real, documentary proof of a crime. He realized his mother had left a trail. And that in this crime, he was a direct accomplice. He had known about the false report. He had stayed silent. And silence meant consent. If the case escalated to criminal charges, he would go to prison alongside his mother. Vinette waited. She knew he had to make a move. It happened the night before the trial. It was late, close to midnight. A quiet knock sounded at Dorothy's house. Not at the door, at the window of the room where Vinette lived. She went to it, pulled the curtain aside. In the darkness under the tree stood a hunched figure. Martin. Her heart pounded. She went out onto the porch. He stood there, head lowered, unable to come closer. He looked even worse than in the cafe. It seemed as if he hadn't slept in days. "What do you want?" Vinette asked coldly. "We need to talk," he whispered. "Not here." They walked into the garden, into the darkness, away from Dorothy's windows. "Mother's gone mad," he blurted quickly, nervously. "She's convinced she can buy everyone. Lawyers, judges. She called Abington, they're plotting something. She says we'll win. But I saw that bank transfer. That's a criminal charge. For real." He looked at her with pleading eyes. "I don't want to go to prison, Vinette. I can't." Vinette stayed silent, letting him pour it out. "I spoke to her. I begged her to make a deal with you. To give you a share, to end this war. And she laughed in my face. Said she'd never give a penny to the daughter of a whore. Said if I chickened out, she'd destroy me too. Strip me of everything. He was cornered. On one side, prison. On the other, his almighty, merciless mother. And he made his choice. I'll tell everything, he breathed out. In court. I'll tell everything I know. About the will. About the conspiracy between my mother and Abington. About how they got that report. About everything. Vinette looked at him. At her husband, who had humiliated her, betrayed her, but who now was ready to betray even his own mother to save his skin. And what do you want in return? She asked. I want guarantees. His voice grew firmer. I want your lawyer to make a deal with the prosecution. Testimony in exchange for immunity from charges. He hesitated, then added, and a small share of the inheritance. Protected, so I'm not left with nothing. I'm not asking for much, just enough not to end up on the street. He was ready to sell his mother. For freedom, and a modest slice of the fortune she had tried to steal from Vinette. It was vile, disgusting. But it was her chance. Her chance to end the war with one decisive blow. The night before the trial was sleepless. Right after speaking with Martin, Vinette called Halid. Despite the late hour, he reacted instantly. He was a pragmatist to the bone and understood what a gift fate had just handed him. Betrayal from the closest person is what destroys any defense, he said over the phone. This is even better than Sterling's investigation. It's pure, distilled proof of guilt, straight from the heart of the enemy's camp. In the morning they met at his office. Halid and his assistants quickly drafted a motion to summon Martin Telford as a witness for the plaintiff, along with a cooperation agreement. The plan had changed. They no longer needed to build a complicated chain of evidence. They had someone who would simply stand up and tell the truth. The day of the trial. The courtroom was packed to the brim. Journalists, civic activists, the merely curious. It seemed the whole city had come to watch the finale of this drama. Vinette sat beside Halid. She was calm. For the first time in all this, she felt neither fear nor fury, but a kind of cold, detached composure. She was no longer a participant, she was a witness. On the defendant's bench sat Louise and Martin with their attorney. Louise, in a severe, expensive suit, flawless hair, her face an impenetrable mask of arrogance. She carried herself like a queen, certain of her own infallibility and power. She cast Vinette glances filled with icy contempt. Martin, on the other hand, sat hunched, pale, eyes downcast. He didn't look once at his mother or at Vinette. The session began. The judge, an elderly man with a weary face, gave the defense the floor. Louise's attorney, sleek, self-assured, rose and began his speech. He spoke of the inconsolable widow being preyed upon by a deceitful fraudster. He spoke of forged documents and of how easy it is to mislead a sick, elderly man. And finally, he revealed his trump card, Your Honor, to put an end to these insinuations once and for all, we present to the court an official medical statement, issued by one of the most respected specialists in our city, Dr. Gatiss. He handed the affidavit to the judge. The judge studied it for a long time, then passed it to Halid. Halid gave it only a brief glance and handed it back. Louise's defense seemed unassailable. A disappointed murmur spread through the hall. It looked as though the case was already decided. The plaintiff may proceed, the judge declared. Halid rose. He did not waste time on long speeches. Your Honor, we will not dispute the authenticity of Dr. Gatiss's signature on this document. We will prove that the document itself is the product of a criminal conspiracy designed to conceal the true will of the deceased and to unlawfully seize his estate. And to begin, I ask to call our first witness. The hall buzzed with whispers again. Who could it be? Called to the stand the witness Benedict Telford, Halid said loudly. The name hit like thunder. Louise flinched. For an instant her confident face faltered. She whipped around toward Martin, but he still stared at the floor. She could not believe it. Her own brother. Against her. The door to the hall opened. Benedict appeared in the aisle. He looked frightened, but his step was firm, his gaze fixed straight ahead. He did not look at his sister. His whole figure radiated the resolve to see it through. He walked slowly to the witness stand. The hall was wrapped in ringing silence. Every eye fixed on this quiet, broken man who was about to destroy his sister. He reached the stand, placed his hand on the Bible, preparing to swear his oath. And at that moment, something happened that no one expected. Not Vinette, not Halid, and least of all Louise. Martin suddenly leapt to his feet. "Stop." His voice cracked, loud and desperate. Everyone turned to him. The judge raised his brows in surprise. Louise looked at her son with fury and bewilderment. "Martin, sit down," she hissed. But he didn't listen. He looked at the judge, at Vinette, at his Uncle Benedict, and his face was twisted with horror and despair. "Don't do it, Uncle Benedict. Don't," he muttered. Then, gulping for air, he shouted for the whole hall to hear, "It's all a lie." The silence shattered. Louise's lawyer jumped up, trying to force him back into his seat. But Martin shoved him aside. He stepped forward, out from behind the defense table. "Your Honor," he panted. "Everything happening here, it's a lie. From start to finish." Louise clawed at the arms of her chair. Her face, once pale, turned ashen gray. She understood. "Be quiet," she shrieked. "Martin, I order you, be quiet." But nothing could stop him now. The dam he had built all his life, of fear, guilt, and dependency, had burst. "The second will, it's real," he blurted, staring at the judge. "Father truly left everything to Vinette. I knew about it. Mother knew. She found it and hid it. She forced me to stay silent." He spoke quickly, breathlessly, terrified of being stopped. "And the dementia certificate, it's a forgery. Father was of sound mind until his last day. Mother arranged it with Dr. Gaddis. And Congressman Abington helped her. They've been in it together for a long time. They planned it all, to steal Father's money." He caught his breath and looked at Vinette. There was no longer fear in his eyes. Only emptiness and a strange, tortured freedom. "And Vinette," he said more quietly. "She isn't just a daughter-in-law. She is my father's daughter. His real daughter. And Mother knew about it when she adopted her from the orphanage. She did it so she could torment her for the rest of her life. To take revenge." He was finished. And the silence in the courtroom was so profound that the humming of the ceiling lamps could be heard. Then that silence was broken by a dull thud. Louise, fainting, had slid from her chair onto the floor. Her world, built on lies and hatred, collapsed in an instant, destroyed by the very person she had always considered her most faithful, obedient puppet, her own son. Martin's confession tore through the silence of the courtroom like an explosion. For several seconds everyone froze, trying to comprehend the scale of what had just been said. Then chaos erupted. Journalists, as if on cue, leapt from their seats, pushing to get closer. Bailiffs rushed to the unconscious Louise lying on the floor. The judge banged his gavel desperately, calling for order, but no one was listening anymore. Vinette sat in her place as if at the eye of a hurricane. All sounds reached her as though through water. She looked at Martin. He stood in the middle of the courtroom, arms hanging, staring into nothing. He had made his move. He had burned every bridge, betrayed his mother, destroyed his life, but saved himself from prison. There was no remorse in his eyes, only desolation. Halid placed a hand on her shoulder, pulling her back to reality. "It's over. This is the end," he said quietly, and in his voice was the satisfaction of a professional. "Checkmate." When Louise was revived and set back in her chair, she was no longer the proud, imperious woman she had been. She was a broken old woman with empty eyes. She looked at her son with naked, powerless hatred. She had lost. Lost everything. The judge, once order was somewhat restored, announced a recess. But everyone understood this was only a formality. The case was already decided. Martin's confession, made publicly, under oath, erased everything else. After the recess, the session was brief. The judge read out the decision. It was dry and merciless, like a protocol. On the basis of newly revealed circumstances and the witness testimony of Martin Telford, the court declares the will under which Louise Telford inherited invalid. The court recognizes as the lawful heir to the estate of the late Rupert Telford the citizen Vinette Graves, as specified in the will of. The judge named the date of that secret visit to the notary. Furthermore, he continued, his voice even harsher, the court sees in the actions of citizen Louise Telford, citizen Maxwell Abington, and citizen Lars Gatiss signs of crimes as defined by the criminal code, large-scale fraud, forgery of documents, and perjury. The materials of this case will be immediately forwarded to the prosecutor's office for criminal proceedings. It was total devastation. Not just a lost inheritance case. It was the beginning of the end of an entire empire built on lies and fear. When Vinette left the courthouse, she was surrounded by a crowd of journalists. They shouted questions, thrust microphones and cameras in her face. Hallett and Sterling, who had become her bodyguards, barely managed to carve a path to the car. She said nothing. She hadn't fully grasped what had happened yet. She only felt how a massive, invisible weight she had carried all her life had finally lifted from her shoulders. They sat in Hallett's office, drinking champagne that Sterling had brought. Benedict was there too. He looked at peace. He had fulfilled his duty to his friend. What happens next? Vinette asked. Next comes the long, tedious paperwork, said Hallett. Transfer of assets, accounts. It will take time. But legally, it's all already yours. As for Louise, her congressman friend, and the doctor forger, they are heading into very dark times. A criminal case, interrogations, trial. Their reputations are destroyed. Abington's career is finished. Gatiss's clinic will most likely be shut down. And Louise. Louise will be left with nothing. Even the house she lives in now belongs to you by law. It was a strange feeling. The house where she had once been a servant was now hers. She could return there as the rightful mistress. She could throw Louise and Martin out. But when she thought about it, she felt neither gloating nor satisfaction. Only emptiness. As she was about to leave, Hallett's secretary said a package had arrived for her. A courier had delivered it. On the package was written only her name. Vinette opened it. Inside was a small flat box and a short note, Vinette, this is the last thing I had to give you. Forgive me for being silent so long. Be happy. Benedict. She opened the box. Inside, on a velvet backing, lay a sealed thick envelope from some medical laboratory. Stamped on it were the words, confidential. To be opened personally. And a date. A date 1 month before Rupert Telford's death. She looked at Hallett in puzzlement. He shrugged. She carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. An official form. The results of a genetic test for paternity. Her eyes ran down the lines, Participant 1, Rupert Telford. Participant 2, Vinette Graves. Samples for analysis, standard. And at the very bottom of the document was the final line, bolded, the probability that Participant 1 is the biological father of Participant 2 is 99.7%. And a signature. And a seal. Vinette lowered the paper. She had known. She had felt it. But now she had proof. Final, irrefutable. Her father had not only written a will and letters. He had made sure no one could ever doubt who she was. He secured her right not just to his wealth, but to his name. He had gathered all the evidence, every last piece. It was as if he had known she would have to walk through hell, and had paved her road out of that hell with stones of irrefutable fact. He had given her not just an inheritance, he had given her armor. And now she was untouchable. 6 months passed. 6 months in which the world turned upside down. The paperwork, just as Hallett had predicted, was long and exhausting, but the result was undeniable. Document by document, signature by signature, the Telford empire passed into her hands. She was no longer Vinette Graves. By court decision, on the basis of the DNA test, she was granted the right to bear her father's name. Now she was Vinette Telford. The criminal case against Louise, Abington, and Gaddis became the loudest trial in the city's history. Abington was stripped of his congressional mandate and sentenced to real prison time for fraud and instigating document forgery. Gaddis lost his license, his clinic, and received a suspended sentence. Martin, as the key witness for the prosecution, got off with a scare and the status of accomplice, but his reputation was destroyed forever. And Louise? Louise was not imprisoned. Considering her age and the sudden deterioration of her health after the trial, she was given a suspended sentence. But it was worse than prison. She lost everything: money, status, power, respect. And even her son, who left for another state after the trial and never once called her again. She was left alone in an empty world that had once lain at her feet. Vinette did not throw them out of the house. She gave them a month to pack their belongings and leave. On the day of their departure, she did not come. She did not want to see their humiliation. This was not revenge. This was justice restored. And now, on a warm autumn day, she stood on the steps of that very house. Her house. A crowd had gathered around, journalists summoned by Sterling, her few but loyal friends, Dorothy, Benedict, Helen, who had once given her the folder with the blueprints. She wore an elegant light suit. And her hair was cut short, in a stylish haircut. It was no longer a mark of humiliation. It had become a symbol of freedom. A symbol of the new life she had chosen for herself. She stepped up to the microphone set on the steps. Her voice rang steady and confident. For many years I lived in this house as a stranger, not knowing my past and having no future, she began. Today I stand here as its mistress, as the daughter of my father, Rupert Telford. She paused, sweeping her gaze over the crowd. I have inherited a vast fortune. And I could spend it on myself, on a luxurious life I never dreamed of. But I know what it means to be alone, what it means to step out of the orphanage walls into a big, foreign world without support or a hand to hold. Her voice did not falter. That is why I have made a decision. Today I announce the creation of the Claire and Rupert Telford Foundation. She named her mother. She restored not only her honor but her place in the family's history. This foundation will help orphanage graduates, young women, to get an education, to find their first job, to find a home of their own, so that none of them repeats my fate. So that none of them becomes a victim of cruelty and arbitrariness. She announced that the first project of the foundation would be that very abandoned country house. Now it would be rebuilt into a modern educational center and temporary housing for the foundation's wards. And this great house in the city, it would be sold, and the proceeds would become the core of the foundation's capital. I don't want to live in a house where there was so much pain, she said. I want to build a new house. Not only for myself. For many. This was her victory. Not over Louise. Over the past. She did not choose to destroy. She chose to create. Final scene. Almost a year later. The sunlit terrace of the renewed, rebuilt country house. It was unrecognizable. Bright, modern, full of life. Around, laughter, voices, music. The first official event of the foundation was underway, the awarding of grants for education to the first wards. Vinette, in a simple yet elegant dress, stood on a small stage. Next to her was smiling Sterling, now the head of the foundation's board of trustees, a shy Benedict, who had found a new purpose in life by overseeing the reconstruction, and aging but happy Dorothy. "Our first grant," said Vinette into the microphone, "goes to Anna. For her incredible will to succeed, for her dream of becoming a doctor and helping people." A young girl, about 17, came up on stage. Shy, but with her head held high. Vinette handed her the certificate and embraced her. The cameras of local TV stations captured the moment. In Vinette's eyes there was no triumph of a victor, but a quiet, profound happiness. She had found her place. Her purpose. The last shot. A small, shabby rented apartment on the outskirts of the city. Dimness. The only source of light, a small, old television with a flickering screen. In a worn-out armchair sat a hunched figure. Louise. She was alone. She wore an old, faded robe. Nothing remained of her former beauty or power. She was just a quiet, lonely old woman. She watched the screen. On it, Vinette's happy face, embracing the young girl. Smiles, applause, the sunlit terrace. Triumph. Louise looked at it without emotion. Her face was an empty mask. There was no anger, no remorse. Only emptiness. She slowly reached out her hand and pressed the button on the TV set. The screen went dark. The room was plunged into total, impenetrable darkness. And so ended this incredible story, dear friends. A story of betrayal, revenge, and, ultimately, of justice. You know, as I read it, I kept asking myself, what truly won in the end? Vinette gained everything, the name, the fortune, respect. But her greatest triumph, I think, was not that. It was that she did not become like Louise. In her hands she held enormous power, and she could have destroyed, trampled, made her tormentors suffer for the rest of their days. But she chose another path, the path of creation. What do you think? Did she do the right thing by creating this foundation? Or in her place would you have acted differently, forcing Louise to feel all the pain she had inflicted on Vinette for years? And Louise? Did she deserve her fate, total oblivion and loneliness in poverty? Or should her punishment have been even harsher? After all, the evil she committed was not momentary, but stretched over decades, calculated and cold. And of course, the most ambiguous figure, Martin. His betrayal of his mother in court, was it an act of desperation, the only right step for self-preservation, or was it the final drop of baseness and cowardice from a weak man? Can he be justified? We are very interested to know your opinion. Write in the comments which character evoked the strongest emotions in you and whose actions you consider right, and whose not. Your perspective is very important to us. If this story did not leave you indifferent, please support us by giving this video a like. It helps our channel grow and create new, equally gripping stories for you. And of course, subscribe to our channel so you don't miss anything. Ahead of you lies many more life dramas that will make you feel, reflect, and care. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. Take care of yourselves, your loved ones, and always act with conscience. We wish you all the very best. At the end of this video, in the middle of the screen, a window will appear. Please click on it. There you will find our other most interesting stories.